Welcome everyone to Prairie Marsh Watch edition number 8. This is our final bird ID session where we're introducing new species. And there's some gems in here. There's a couple of tricky species, but there's also some species that are also really close to my heart. So I'm excited about this one. And next week is going to be the big review. So just a heads up, that one runs at least 2 hours where we're going to go through all of the species and their ID characteristics. We're not going to do any life history stuff unless it's like really critical to the ID. Um, we're just going to do a great big review session. So if you can't watch the whole thing next week and you can only make it for part of it, don't worry, it'll be recorded for you to check out online later. But this is the last full ID session, so it's kind of a little bit sad. Um, Before we get fully rolling here, I'd just like to say that I am broadcasting today from Saskatoon, which is located on the homelands of the Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, Saulteaux, and Stoney First Nations, as well as the homeland of the Métis people. It is Treaty 6 territory, and it's been a lovely place for me to call home for the past 11 or so years, so I really like Saskatoon myself. My name is Leanne Lachemoy, and I know there are still new people registering for MarshWatch, so I work for a not-for-profit called Birds Canada. We're nationwide. I'm located, as I just mentioned, in Saskatoon, but we have staff literally all over the country at this point. And our mission is to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada, and that includes the habitats that they depend on to live. I've had the fabulous fortune of working for Birds Canada for almost the entirety of my career, and you can see some older baby photos of Leanne sitting in some wetlands. I really do love these wetland environments. So that's a little bit about me and Birds Canada. Tonight we're going to cover the last few birds and amphibians. That's going to be recorded and posted online. And then we'll go to the quiz and discussion later on, and that won't be recorded, so you can feel free to ask all the weird questions that you want. Okay. On the menu for this evening, we have our final two rail species. We have the Virginia rail and the yellow rail. We have two look-alike sparrows, the LeConte sparrow and the Nelson sparrow. We have two look-alike grebes, the Western and Clark's grebes, as well as the bobolink and the white-faced ibis, and two really neat toads. We got the Plains Spadefoot and the Great Plains toad. If we have time, I'm also going to go over a little bit about just collecting checklists for MarshWatch, but we'll see how far we get. Okay, without further ado, let's introduce our first rail species of the evening. This is the very handsome but very secretive Virginia rail. They're actually fairly large-bodied, especially when you look at them on the side. All rails are kind of flattened, so they look large, broad-sided, but head-on, they're really narrow, and they're able to weave in and out of all of that kind of tight, structured wetland emergent vegetation. So they are really built for weaving back and forth. And they even have little vestigial claws on the tips of their wings, and that's thought to help them just gain maybe a little bit more purchase through that tight wetland vegetation that if you've ever tried to walk through a wetland, some of it can be really thick and really challenging, but these guys thrive in that sort of a place. And they're definitely, rails generally are secretive. There's another even more secretive one that we'll cover here in a second, but Virginia rails, you're going to be hard pressed to see them, so it's really worthwhile learning their songs and their calls. But of course, we'll talk about what this bird looks like. It's pretty unique in terms of rails on the prairies. In other places, there are rails that look sort of similar, but if you're doing this on the northern Great Plains, we've got just the Virginia rail. So they have a long, drooping red bill, a very short upturned tail that kind of just blends into those wingtips, and it's not something that you really get to see very much. Both sexes look alike, and they have a paler gray face on kind of a warm chestnutty body, and there's black and white streaking on the flanks. And there is kind of dark lines up here on the bird's back. But again, that kind of contrast between dark and light parts, or kind of cool tones and warm tones on the face, that kind of paler patch there. And they have this beady red eye. If you do get to see them, they're super handsome little birds. Definitely something that's more often heard than seen. And they're active in kind of narrow windows of time. This isn't a species like the Sora that you might be hearing all throughout the day, all throughout the night. They're just yakking away. The Virginia rail really is tightly crepuscular, which means that it's active at those kind of dawn dusk hours. So right kind of just before sunrise and a little bit after sunrise, but they don't seem to call well into the morning. And again, on the other side of the day, in that evening period where they call again kind of, around that sunsetty, dusky time. So they're a little bit trickier to get to see and even get to hear. And it's not a call that they have that travels any sort of great distance. You'll find them, they like kind of deep-ish wetlands that have a lot of cattails and a lot of bulrushes in them. So there's two calls that you will commonly hear, and one of them is called the ticket call, and it kind of just goes ticket, 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 ticket. And it, for me, like it really blends into the background. It's not terribly loud. It's not terribly flashy. And sometimes, you'll be standing there at a wetland and finally cue into it and you go, gosh, how long has that thing been calling? And you just finally, you've listened to all the rest of the sounds in the soundscape, and then your brain is starting to pick out other little sounds. That's something that I find really helps is you're just getting to a wetland and you're like getting overwhelmed with the amount of birds singing and calling. Just take a few deep breaths and just take it in. Don't even worry about picking out different calls. Just listen to it, absorb it, and then start picking out little bits. Because if you get out of the car and you go, oh my God, everything's going all at the same time, it's super overwhelming. Some of these wetlands are so active. Okay, so here is that ticket call. Play it once more here. So it is something that I do find blends into the background. Unless you're fairly close to them, then it has a bit of oomph to it, but it doesn't travel terribly far. And the last is the grunting call, and it kind of like a pig grunting, or people have described it as if you're like flinging a quarter on a table and you're getting it spinning, and like the kind of end where it just kind of like sputters out and it slowly, comes to a halt. That sort of resembles the grunt. So we'll play it here. And they'll often do this as a duet. So one of the pair will start and then the other will join in. I don't know which sex does which, and it's really hard with birds that, look identical to know which is doing what. Usually it's the male that leads off on these sorts of things, but it could totally be female initiated too. It's just hard to know. So let's listen to that grunt again. So really an interesting grunting, squeaking kind of noise. And again, it's not something that travels terribly far. So what do these guys do for food? So they walk around much like other rails, and they're just probing and they're pecking at stuff. And they will eat all kinds of kind of animal insect matter that they can get their little beaks on. So snails, slugs, insects, spiders. Basically, if it moves and it crosses their path and they can catch it, they will probably eat it. They'll also eat a few seeds of aquatic plants, but they really do go around and just like peck at all those little bits of vegetation, or not, well, they'll pick bugs and things off the vegetation or in the water, or probe in a little bit of the muck to get those benthic invertebrates down there, like all of those larvae. So really handsome little species. And if you're really, really patient and you're at a wetland where you know that, you've heard them there before, you might get lucky and see them come out sometime. So very handsome little bird. Fairly widely distributed across much of the southern portions of Canada along the US border, as well as a lot of the northern US states. In other jurisdictions, there are some other similar rails, but because we're keeping it prairie focused, this is the only rail that looks like that in our territory. Okay, next up, we have the most secretive rail that we have in Canada for sure. There's an even more secretive one, but you only get that one down in the States. That's the black rail. So yellow rails are small and both sexes look alike, and they are very, very camouflaged. They are extremely secretive and they are highly nocturnal. So this isn't a species that you are likely to hear during the day. And you get some populations on the James Bay coast, and those guys do call during the day, but they don't really get a whole lot of darkness. So I think that's probably what's going on there. But in places in, southern Canada, there's the southern portions where we do get nighttime during the summer. These guys are super nocturnal. They'll start calling at around like 10, 11 o'clock, and then they'll stop by about 2 into 3 o'clock in the morning. So they are rather secretive. They have a compact, short little bill, and they're just kind of very camouflage. They have a lot of buffy, kind of straw-like streaks going on, dark streaks. You are pretty unlikely to see these guys. The only reason I've seen them is because we actually did some rail banding for several years at a study site. So we'd go out at night with fish landing nets, playing their calls, getting them to come in and then catching them, banding them to see if they would return to the same locations. Spoiler alert, like a lot of things that rely on shallow ephemeral habitats, they are not strongly tied to those breeding grounds because it's not, it wouldn't necessarily be worth it because those conditions can be so variable from year to year. They're just migrating and stopping where it looks good and where they can kind of get a territory. So you don't often they don't come back to the same locations or even the same part of the larger landscape. So very handsome. They like shallow, sedgy, grassy wetlands. They'll get into cattail areas as those have drawn down. And if you do happen to flush one, they really handily have this kind of white patch on their wing, kind of where the speculum colors would be on the dabbling ducks in those same secondary flight feathers. They do flash white. So if you happen to be walking around a sedge meadow and you flush up a small nondescript bird that has that white patch on the wings, you might have just flushed up a yellow rail. But um, they're an at-risk species and they're really tough to monitor because they only call like in the dead of night. And I've done a lot of nighttime marsh surveys specifically to go count these guys. And I'm strange. I really love wetlands at night. They come alive. It's so alive, but also very peaceful. It's just a neat place. If you have a wetland near you and you can, and you're someone who likes to like stay up late a little bit, I totally recommend going out like the height of June in the middle of the breeding season when everything in the wetland is just going nuts at night. It is totally magical. These guys are really, really fond of small snails, and that makes up the bulk of their diet on the breeding grounds. And sometimes I'll be walking through these areas with these kind of rushes and low sedges, and if you just start seeing snails all over that place, like that is a good indication that that place could hold some yellow rails. On years when the prairies are very wet, when there's a lot of flooding of, all of those basins that aren't often filled with water, you can see a fair number of them in an area. So snails super important, but they're also going to be eating other things that they can get their little bills on. So aquatic insects, terrestrial insects, and seeds. They have really neat calls, and it sounds quite literally like you're taking two stones and you're tapping them together in a rhythmic tick 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 tick. That is the overall pattern of the yellow rail call. Sometimes they do something wonky, but overall it's tick 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 tick. Let's give it a listen here because it doesn't sound like a bird at all. And on a calm, still night, you can actually hear that a reasonable distance, like, 200, 300 yards out. Like, if it's really calm and really still, you can hear them going. And if you happen to be lucky enough to be in a place with a lot, it just sounds like popcorn going off because there's overlapping tick, 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 tick. You know how you get, if you're out this time of year, like the frogs are starting to go and it's just overlapping calls. That's what it sounds like with the yellow rail, just overlapping calls there. So let's listen to it again. Very non-bird sounding. So pretty neat little birds. Um, I've included a video because I actually have a video of a bird. I don't usually have these things. But like I said, we did yellow rails for a number of years, and these guys are just, they're so feisty. They have the sharpest claws. You wouldn't think that they do, but their claws are like little razor blades, and banding them, you'd just be covered in cuts from them kicking you. And because rails do a lot of walking, they have really strong legs. Like they will choose walking over flying into the calls that you're broadcasting. Some of them will just like, yeah, I'm just gonna like check it out, walk through. So this is after we've banded it. So we've put a band on its leg. We've taken some measurements, taken some photos of it, of, you know, wings in case anybody wants to look at molt kind of stuff. And then we let them go, and they are a little bit blinded by the light. So they take a second to walk off. But these guys, some of them are just so testosterone fueled that we have had them, you put them in a little bag when you're banding a bird to weigh them, and we have had yellow rails start calling in that bag, or when you're holding them just start going tick 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 at you. Like these guys are just, they must just, the hormones must just be going nuts because they're just like, I heard a big yellow rail. I'm here to fight it. This is my territory. And some of them you could never catch. Some of them were afraid of that big rail sounding thing, and it would just always get further and further. But here's the release of a yellow rail. Ugh, shaking off the people gunk. Yeah, man, what the heck was that? Oh, okay. Yeah, shake it off. And then they just walk away, shaking his little bum. And they go around like little mice in the thick wetland vegetation. He's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm just gonna walk off here now. So pretty neat little birds that I've had the immense privilege of getting to work with and band for a 4 year period. It was some time ago, but it was just a ton of fun. Yellow rails have a fairly broad distribution across a fair swath of Canada and some of the northern US states. So if you have a sedgy wetland, go check it out at night. You might hear a yellow rail, but if you don't, you will be treated to just so many birds singing. It's fantastic. Wetlands at night, one of the best places. Okay. The next thing we have is two very similar sparrows, and there's similarities both visually, auditorily. Their habitats can overlap. There is a little bit of partitioning, but they're very, very similar. And so first, we're just going to focus on the sounds. The LeConte sparrow gives a tick-a-ch, and it sounds more insect-like. And the Nelson sparrow kind of sounds like you are tossing bacon into a hot, sizzling pan. It has like a very ephemeral frying something kind of sound to it. And it sort of sounds like it's saying, if you will. So let's give a listen. And here's a spectrogram for them. So the LeConte sparrow is a little bit higher pitched, and the Nelson sparrow is a little bit lower pitched, but you can see they each start with a little note and then kind of a breathy kind of sequence afterwards. So let's listen to the LeConte sparrow's tick-a-ch. Sounds like a grasshopper or a cricket or something. But you can hear that note at the beginning, like ticka, and then that buzz on the back end. Let's hear it again. Versus the Nelson sparrow, bacon sizzly tequila. And this is a call that does not travel very far. If you hear it from 50 meters away, your hearing's pretty good and it's pretty quiet. So let's listen to the Nelson sparrow here. Super breathy. So you can imagine a sound like, couldn't hear the LeConte. As are other people? I know Linda can't hear it. Is everybody else hearing it? It might be an issue on Linda's end. Somebody wants to type in the chat if anybody else is hearing these calls. Okay, I think Linda, I think that might be something on your end, so you might just need to check out the video afterwards. Apologies for that. So Play the two again, the tick-a-ch, kind of insect-like and harsher, and then the Nelson Sparrow, which is more sizzly and ephemeral. And the Nelson's is a struggle to hear, um, even in good conditions. So if somebody's there and trying to point out the Nelson Sparrow, sometimes it is so fleeting that your brain isn't processing some of it quickly enough. So that can happen. Both of them are fairly secretive little birds. You don't always get to see very good looks at them. They do look very similar. So they're in the same genus of sparrows, and they overall have kind of these orangey tones to them, kind of straw-colored orangey tones and streaky. They are very, very similar. And honestly, I always remember what I'm looking for on the bird, and then I usually have to go consult my guide. It's like, which one has the straw-colored stripe, the median crown stripe? That's the stripe in the center of the head. Which one has the straw-colored one, and which one has little purple streaks on the back of its neck? So the LeConte sparrow is the one with that straw-colored stripe right in the center, right down. Think of it like a little part in his hair. And then on the nape, that back of the neck has like little purpley streaks on kind of a grayish background. The Nelsons, they tend to be a bit more orangey, but again, a lot of lighting things can be um, tough to pick out. Oh, is it more straw? Is it more orange? The lighting can really screw you over that way. Ooh, see, I've been at a conference all day. So that median crown stripe in the Nelson Sparrow is kind of this slate colored, and they have a plain nape to the back of their neck, and it is also gray. So overall, if you're seeing a small little sparrow that just really gives kind of these orangey tones, that orangey wash to it, um, that's your clue that it's either going to be a LeConte sparrow or a Nelson sparrow. We'll go over their habitats and just keep seeing little photos of them side by side because that's sometimes the best way. So LeContes you'll get in a bit more open habitat and marshy meadows, but they still like to be in proximity of moist soil is probably the best thing to call these species. Like they're moist soil sparrows. Like you won't find them like in a really dry upland arid area. There needs to be some amount of moisture in the soil for you to really see them and get them. The Nelsons tends to be in a bit wetter places, so a little bit more sedges happening than you're likely to see in Nelsons. The LeContes can just do kind of wet, grassy, and some of those rushes in some of those grassy paths. So there is definitely habitat overlap. The Nelsons likes it a touch moister than the LeConte sparrow. Both of these guys are going to be eating insects and arthropods in the breeding season, especially as they're egg laying. And on the wintering grounds, like most sparrows, they eat a lot of seeds. They'll pick up seeds, especially too in the early season. As they're migrating and stuff, but especially like anything that is going to be laying eggs and trying to grow its body size, that insect body mass is super, super important. So two very similar looking species, and I've been in habitats where I've seen lots of them, and the amount of times that I can ID them by sight is probably I could probably count it on one hand because they're small and they tend to flush up and away from you, and all you're kind of getting is like, ooh, streaky orangey looking sparrow, please sing. Please do something. Or if it happens to turn its head and I can see that there's that pale stripe on the head, I'm like, okay, I gotta go remember which one has the stripe. So I don't quite have that. Yeah, they're a little bit challenging. Okay. We'll listen to those calls again, and then I have a track in the middle here that has both of them going. So let's do that LeConte one more time, that insect-like tick-a-ch. and the more bacon, sizzly, ephemeral Nelson sparrow. And both of these species fall in frequencies that um, you tend to lose if you're losing any sort of hearing loss, you often lose up in these ranges. And I have hearing aids. I've been wearing them for the last 10 years, in part because it just it runs in my family. People don't have the best hearing as they get into their 30s and 40s. And I look at it like glasses. I am very, very happy that I can have hearing aids that allow me to go out and hear these birds. But if you're going out and you have like, gosh, like other people are hearing these things and I can't hear them, it might be a little bit of hearing loss. So just keep that in mind that hearing loss is interesting in that it's not like a it's not necessarily like a dampening. It's just like you have that cutoff for that decibel level. So if, birds calling away, and you're far enough away that it's not loud enough, you just don't hear it at all. And suddenly you get close enough, you go, oh, I hear that blue jay now. And that used to happen to me all the time before I got my hearing checked and I got hearing aids. So just throwing that out there. No shame in getting hearing aids. They're wonderful. Okay, here is the LeConte sparrow and Nelson sparrow singing in the same track, and see if you can pick out the differences. Oh, it's a little quiet. So hopefully you were able to hear some of those and pick up on the differences. There was also a Wilson's snipe or two going continuously in the background, and there was a Sora that also called in the background of that. Okay. Let's take a quick peek at the range. The LeConte sparrow is a bit more restricted. You don't find them on either of the coasts in Canada. They're a bit more centrally located, a lot of in the kind of Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and through parts of a big swath of Ontario and a little bit into northern Quebec. And the Nelson sparrow has an interesting distribution. There is one kind of population that exists in parts of like this is more, moist mixed grassland, aspen parkland, and parts of the southern boreal forest. There's populations on the coastline here, and then there's populations in the Maritimes on these coasts. So it's interesting when you have these little disjunct populations of species. You wonder if eventually, like many, 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 many years down the road, like maybe those will shift to be different species ultimately because there is that bit of geographic separation. So I like maps, and maps of birds are always interesting. Okay, two grebe species. We'll cover the western grebe first, in part because the western grebe is by far the most common of these two species. It's actually quite hard to, in most places, to go find a Clark's grebe. So if you're seeing these birds, they're likely western grebe. So this is a fairly large grebe, and they usually have their neck upstretched, and they're black and white overall. They have white cheeks and a big kind of white patch that goes along the sides of their neck, and their whole front of their neck is white. Their belly is also white, and they're just dark on top. So the crown, the back of the neck, and the upper parts of the back here. And in Western grebes, the black extends around the bottom of the eye. In the Clark's grebe, the you can see the eye maybe a little bit more clearly because there's white around the eye. But in the Western grebe, the face is darker and that black extends down below the eye. The bill is very long and very pointed, like it is on some of the other large grebes, like the redneck grebe that we saw. And it is kind of a more dull yellowish color with kind of dark above and below, but it's not bright yellow or anything. It is kind of a duller yellowish color. As a reminder, grebes are diving species and they have their legs just super far back on their bodies. They have cute little lobed feet, which allows them to paddle really well. And they dive underwater for fish. So you'll see western grebes on large wetlands or lakes. And they nest in large stands of emergent vegetation in big colonies. So you'll usually be, if you're seeing western grebes, you're seeing many Western grebes at once. You don't often see, too many singletons, unless it's a big lake, and sometimes they'll spread out eventually on that lake, maybe like later in the season. But usually, you'll see multiple of these Western grebes together. They do have a loud creaking call, which you can hear quite a ways away. And because they are out on large, kind of open stretches of water, that call just travels over that water surface a long way. It's kind of like if you're in a boat and you're chatting with your friend, the people on shore might be listening to your conversation just because of the way the physics of sound works, and the sound waves bounce on the surface of the water. So same with birds on the water. If they're calling from the water, they will often have, a call that travels a fair distance, just because of physics. They are also fairly loud, so that definitely helps too. So listen once more to that creaking call. Okay. The Western grebe, of course, is a diver. They eat fish and occasionally other prey, but they're really after fish. So you're going to be seeing these on bodies of water that can support fish populations. And like other grebes, they do elaborate courtship rituals. Um, I think it was maybe one of the Life of Birds or Planet Earth where there was really good sequences of grebes doing all of their dances. These guys will do they will in pairs get up and run on the surface of the water and they'll paddle, 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 and then they'll splash down. But it is amazing how far they can get out of the water because those legs are so far back on their body. They're able to kind of do this getting out of the water act. So they do weed ceremonies where they're just showing their mates, like, yes, 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 we can build a great nest together. We're both great at getting vegetation to build our nests. And like other grebes, they will pluck body feathers and eat them and feed them to their chicks. And it's thought that that creates a little bolus in their stomach to help just help with the digestion of fish bones. We don't know for sure, but that's what the speculated purpose of that is. So they eat the feathers and the fish bones stay in the stomach acids for a little bit longer and it helps them degrade. That's what the thinking is. They don't they don't respond to surveys or answer a question, so we have to make inference. Western grebes are definitely a Western species, so if you're an Eastern candidate, you got to come west to see these wonderful, lovely little birds. And the very similar Clark's grebe is one of those ones where most people are trying to get it on their life list, especially here in Canada, that they're not easy to come across. They are very, very similar to the Western grebe, but as you can see, overall, as I was mentioning, that white is around the eye in the Clark's grebe. So in Clark's, you can see the eye. For whatever reason, that's what jogs my memory for the Western and Clark's grebes. If you do get them side by side, the difference in bill color is striking. It is much more of a bright yellow, almost getting a little bit orangey at the base compared to that more dull Western grebe. And here's kind of I love these shots sometimes because this more accurately reflects what you're likely to see through, binoculars at a great distance. It's like a little fuzzy. The lighting's not perfect because they're far. But even here, you can see the difference. So you can see the eye in the Clarks, and then the Western grebe, it just kind of blends in with the black of the rest of the head. And that you can even detect a little bit of a difference between the bill colors. It would be harder just to do it based on bill color if you only had one alone by itself. But if you do get to see a lot of Western grebes, you get used to that bill color. And then when you finally see a Clark's grebe, and I think I've only seen one, it is much brighter. It is strikingly different. And they're very elegant birds. They have that kind of just swan-like composure to them. They don't often scrunch up their necks. They often have their necks nice and elongated. Um, Same sorts of habitats. They will nest in the same colonies, so large wetlands or lakes. And yeah, again, in colonies, but tough to see. And there are hybrids, which of course always muddies the waters. You're going, ooh, you can like sort of see the eye on it, and maybe it has intermediate characteristics. So just know that that kind of stuff happens, and those intermediates can be tough to detect even, or tough to assign to looks a little bit more like one than the other. So don't worry about it. If you're seeing this species, it's very likely to be a Western grebe, and just double check that you can't really see the eye at a distance. Okay, and they have a similar call, but it's more monosyllabic, just a creak. There's multiple calling in this track, but it's more just a single creak, creak, as opposed to creak, creak, like the Western. And we'll do a comparison side by side here. So little bit better photos side by side here. Bill, a dull yellow. The black extends around the eye. And at a distance, you can't see that red, so you can't really see the eye at all. Whereas in the Clark's grebe, the white extends around the eye, and at a distance, the eye just becomes more visible because of that, because it's on that white background. And again, difference in bill, slight difference in shape, but that's not something that you're going to detect at a great distance at all. So let's listen to the Westerns Creak Creak. Versus the more monosyllabic creak of the Clarks. So both very elegant species, both very similar looking. Clark's grebe has an even more restricted range compared to the Western grebe, so we don't get them quite as extensively. And again, the Western grebes, at least in Canada, far outnumber the Clark's grebe. So it's usually a bit of a mission that people are excited when they finally lay eyes on a Clark's grebe. Okay, changing gears, we are going back to the land. So this is the extremely handsome bobolink. So males and females look different in this species. They're in the blackbird family, as you might have guessed by the male's plumage, and they have that kind of conical pointed bill that all of the blackbirds share in common. It is black in the males, and the male is quite striking with his black and white plumage. His back and upper rump here are all it's mostly white. There's a little bit of gray smudged in it, but it reads as very white at a distance, especially in contrast with the jet blackness of the rest of its coloration. So a little bit on the upper shoulder here, and the back of its head, like a little skull cap, or like almost like, the black feathers have been removed, is just ever so slightly straw colored. So it's not quite bright white. It just has that kind of pale yellowish beigey look to it. And they make just such a delightful song that you hear it, and I don't know if it could not spark joy. They sound sort of like R2-D2, or like they're making robot noises, and the males, they'll chase each other and they'll sing and they'll display, they'll puff their wings up and get their feathers all going. And it's just such a delightful sound. You'll find bobolinks in moist grassy areas, so moist grassy fields. They'll also make use of irrigated hay fields, natural grassy wetland edges, and I've seen them in alfalfa fields as well. Things that, have a bunch of moisture in them. Again, sort of like that LeConte and Nelson sparrow, need that kind of moist soil-ish environment. But they're not necessarily looking for open water. So here is their just absolutely delightful song. Brings me so much joy. absolutely sounds like some sort of android robot thing. And pretty fitting that we're doing this in the May the 4th be with you week. So wonderful Bobolink. It is not something that you're gonna forget the first time you actually hear it in person. We'll play it once more just because it is such a delight. They're neat little birds too. They have really long claws or nails on the ends of their toes. I'm not sure why. The other blackbirds don't have quite the nail going on that these guys do, and they have pointed tail feathers that are kind of similar to a woodpecker's tail feather in that kind of like they have that pointy tip to them. Again, I'm not sure what is behind that. Surely there's a reason, but if there is, I don't know it. The females are the complete opposite. If the males are flashy, showy, looking to be seen, the females are like, no, I want none of that. I want to be as plain colored and boring and blending into this grassy habitat as we can. So it totally looks like a different species. She has a similar kind of long conical bill, but it is pink. And they tend to look, in my estimation, they always look very leggy. For whatever reason, it doesn't stand out so much on the males. I think in part because they're often puffing up their feathers and they're displaying so much. Um, but the female bobolinks just look leggy. They have those long tail feathers. Overall, brown streaky, but with a very straw color, all over the belly. There's a little bit of streaks on their chest and on the flanks, but the belly is relatively plain, and that base color is really that kind of yellow straw-ish color. They have a dark eyeline, and they have a dark cap with a pale central stripe. And they are sneaky. So you will see them sometimes on territory with the males, but far, far easier to get a look at the males because they want to show off. They want to be seen. So that is the female bobolink. And they glean insects and things from vegetation. So they'll go after insects, larvae, spiders, snails, especially again in that breeding season. And of course, they will also eat a fair number of seeds as well. So here's just some different angles of the males doing different displays. When I say they're you don't see the legs because they're puffed up a lot. They really give it their all in terms of trying to give a, big show for the females. And that straw patch on the back of the head is just a dead giveaway. There's nothing else that looks like it. And of course, if they sing, you're not going to be mistaking it for another species. The female, on the other hand, you might mistake for a sparrow, especially if you don't get a good look at her. If she's just like kind of going around the vegetation and diving in, you go, "Oh, that was brown and streaky." And again, that harkens back to you can't always identify every bird that crosses your line of sight. You just don't always have enough time to gather the information. And learning bird identification, whether that's vocalizations or visual, it is really like learning a language. And you think, if you are at a big banquet or a dinner party or something in a noisy environment, if you're talking in your native tongue, you have an easier time hearing or following the conversation, even if you can't. Like, there's some things that, like, oh, there was a little bit of noise over what she said, but I could pick out enough because you're very, very intimately familiar with that language. Let's say you go somewhere and, someone's trying to speak to you in a language that is not your mother tongue, not one that you are very, very fluent in, maybe a little bit, it is going to be a totally different ball game because you really need to hear the whole word and hear it slowly spoken to. So identification is a little bit like that. The better, more familiar you are with it, the more you can glean quickly from just like a quick look. But as you're starting out, you're just learning the alphabet, you're learning the little words that make ID possible. So just You can't always identify everything that crosses your line of sight. And even if you're an expert, not everything's identifiable. Bobolinks have quite the wide distribution as well, so hopefully they are a species that is either familiar to you or you'll have the chance to get out and go see yourself someday. The white-faced ibis is a little bit of an interesting departure. This is one that has been expanding its range. So it is quite the striking looking bird. It is dark overall, especially in low light conditions. You're just like, wow, that is a dark, strange shaped bird. Both sexes are similar, kind of medium to large wading bird. They have a long neck and they have a long, decurved or drooping bill, and it is quite long. And that bill is a little bit kind of blue grayish looking. Both sexes have this kind of maroon brown body color overall, and there is a lot of iridescence on their wings and back, and that what that looks like is really going to be highly dependent on the lighting conditions relative to where you're standing. So again, with that iridescence, it's a structural color, and that is going to rely on the light hitting the feather and bouncing back to your eyeball at the right angles for it to look iridescent. It can totally just look black at the wrong angles. So just keep that in mind for anything that's iridescent and shiny. They have reddish looking legs and they have white feathers around some white facial skin on their face. You can see that kind of white around the edging of those kind of bare parts on their face. Hence the white-faced ibis. The very similar glossy ibis is really tough to tell apart. For the most part, we generally have white-faced ibis, but there could be some glossy ibises sticking around. They're tough. They're super tough to tell apart. So, mostly we're looking at white-faced ibis here in Canada. So you'll find these guys in shallow wetland and they nest in emergent vegetation or low trees and shrubs. They're not something that you're necessarily going to identify by sound, but they do make noise, so we can listen to ears, kind of have these guttural honks. It's definitely a noise that will make you, go and look at it going, that sort of sounds like a duck, but not quite like a duck with, a stuffy nose or something. So that's the white-faced ibis call there. Young birds look all kinds of brown and a little bit of streaking on the head, and they look very dark overall. First, summer birds haven't gotten to their full breeding plumage yet. There's no white on the face. And young of the year will often wander up from the south, and they have just overall dark skin, dark eyes. That first summer has a little bit of color starting to creep in, and they just look funny in flight. They have their neck kind of a little bit low and sticking out and that big drooping bill, and they have these long legs that kind of hang back behind them. They're a bird that's going to be going around and probing that kind of aquatic substrate and moist soil. So they're going to go after, those insects and aquatic insects, those terrestrial ones as well, earthworms and crustaceans, and they will snap those up and eat them. White-faced ibis, as I alluded to earlier, they're on the move. So this is the bird life range map for them. But you could notice, like, oh, why is Leanne talking about these species? Well, if you take a look at the records on Birds Canada's nature counts, you can see that ibises have been seen and we're finding them nesting, getting into the northern Great Plains. So they're they're on the move, and this happens sometimes with species as they, expand their range, headed northwards. We don't see a ton of that sort of thing, but white-faced ibis are certainly doing it along with the black-necked stilts. They're just headed north and moving into the prairies. So kind of neat. So there are species that we'll see more and more of. Likely, the biggest group I saw was on the Saskatchewan Alberta border. I think it was right here actually, and it was a group of about 80 or so. I was all excited because I saw one or two, and then I kept driving down the road, and it's like, oh, there's the rest of the flock. Okay, it was a really big group of them, and it was just kind of cool to see because I that was definitely the most ibis I'd ever seen in Canada, like far and away. So neat little species. Okay, moving along, we have our two toads. And these two toads are really neat because in both of these species, the adults they primarily just hang out underground and are inactive a lot of the time. So they call that fossorial, where they dig in the soil and they just spend most of their time under the ground, which is interesting. They have these short, stumpy little front legs. Like this is not a toad that's very elegant in its movements, but because it has those short, stumpy little legs, it can dig and, burrow into that kind of loose substrate. So it's going to be looking for kind of not very compacted soil. So the plain spadefoot is a relatively small toad. They have large eyes, like kind of comically large, with a vertical pupil slit. And there we go. So if you do happen to see them during the day, and I have never seen this species, I would love to see one. I'm still waiting for it to happen, but they have this kind of cat eye look to them, which is just super cool. Um, their their body color is quite variable, kind of tan brownish, and they usually have little orange spots on their body. Some have more of a striped appearance to them, and again, kind of short, stumpy little legs. This isn't going to be making any, phenomenal leaps and bounds. And these guys will come out during warm, wet periods in the summer, and they'll come out. They'll breed in kind of shallow ponds, and they'll feed, and then they'll just go back underground where it's kind of cool and moist, and they'll wait out until the next kind of moist period. And they mostly come out at night, so they're a fairly secretive species. So this is one that if you run into it, you're more likely to just hear it at night than you are necessarily to see it. But let's listen to its call here, kind of making a whir whir noise. And we do have the plains spadefoot, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba. So I'll play that again, that kind of whirring noise. And these guys really occur more in kind of grasslandy areas, more in the southern parts of Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Manitoba. But of course, they're relying on wetlands for their breeding, but you'll see them often in kind of upland habitat that have shallow wetlands nearby. Oop. And of course, we have the Great Plains toad, which is a species at risk. I think it's listed as special concern. It is a more medium-sized toad, and this one I have heard, but I have also not seen it. Has a similar look to it, kind of just large, floppy-looking toad with these short legs that are again good for burrowing into that kind of friable, easily, scooted out of the way soil. So, the body color, again, variable grays, browns, and greens. They tend to have darker blotching and, again, those short little legs. They'll emerge sporadically to feed nocturnally. And again, that'll probably usually coincide with moisture periods because they do need that moisture. They use small ephemeral wetlands to breed, and you will find them in habitats like deserts, grasslands, semi-desert shrublands, open floodplains, and even in agricultural areas. They have a long kind of warbling trill that I can just best describe as the sound that you make when you do this, go beep, 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 beep. That's what they sound like. I have looked to figure out a name for that, and I don't know if one exists. So if you know what that's called, um, let me know because I will maybe just like write it out and not do that. But that's what they sound like. So give a listen. So it's very, very long and it is quite loud. When I did hear it, it was like first survey of the morning, half hour before sunrise, and it was near some oil and gas infrastructure. So it was near an active pump jack that was going and making noise. And it took me a bit to like cue into, wait, that's not noise that's coming from the pump jack. That's toads calling from the wetland like right next to the pump jack. It was really really quite interesting. So long, loud, and you're essentially going that's what it sounds like. So cute little toads. They're you find them more sporadically, and that's part of why, they're a species of special concern in Canada because they're just less widespread on the landscape here. Okay, we made it through the birds and and the amphibians. So, as a review, we've got the Virginia rail does the ticket, 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 and the grunt call, and the grunting, and the yellow rail, that very non-bird call sounding tick, 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 sounds like tapping stones together. So both fairly secretive and excuse me, you're more likely to hear them at night, and the Virginia rail, like really that strongly dusk and dawn, throughout the night a little bit as well, but really strong dusk and dawn, and yellow rail middle of the night. They don't even like to be super active when there's a full moon and no cloud cover. That's how much they rely on not being seen. And the LeConte sparrow and the Nelson's sparrow, the LeConte sparrow more like an insect, take a shh. And the Nelson's sparrow, ephemeral, quiet, bacon sizzly tequila. Our two look-alike grebes, the more common western grebe, more of a two-syllabled creak creak. And the Clark's more monosyllabic creak. You would have a hard time picking a Clark's grebe out if it was in amongst a colony with western grebes. That would just be really tough to do because you're not there'd be so many overlapping calls. You'd be like, oh, is that one syllable or two? You're better off just trying to scan for the grebes. And of course, the Bobolink's immensely wonderful R2D2 robot noises. And I don't have a slide for the white-faced ibis for the review, but guttural kind of honking with your nose plugged sort of noise. But you're mostly focused on the visuals for that species. Our plains spadefoot, whirring noises, whir, whir. Oh, hey, there we go. And the Great Plains toad, long, loud, warbling trill. Pause it there. Really goes on for a long time. Okay. I am going to very quickly run through MarshWatch checklists. So you can register on Nature Counts to sign up and record any observations from any wetlands you choose. You don't have to go to a specific one. You can revisit the same one day after day, or you can try to go to different places. But I would encourage you all to go try out some of your ID skills. And we designed this with newer birders in mind. And so you can, let us know if you're identifying, if you're like, yes, I'm confident, I'm identifying everything. Or you're like, no, I'm only reporting some species, not super confident yet, but I can tell you about the ones that I did see and did recognize. So the steps are register. So you can register for MarshWatch on Nature Counts. You can just visit the Prairie MarshWatch page, and hit submit observations. That will take you to Nature Counts. You can download the Nature Counts smartphone app, or you can print off the data sheet. And I did make up a data sheet a few years ago for this, and it is on the MarshWatch website as well. On the front half, there's a bit of a data sheet that takes you through the process of what kind of information do you need to collect to, submit citizen science data. And on the back of it, there's some handy comparisons and silhouettes and just a little bit of information about some of the common wetland calls. So that can be useful. Feel free to check it out. And then, yeah, go out to any wetland you like and identify and count the birds and make note of the amphibians and then submit the observation. So that can be submitting through the app, which means you're all done in one shot. You open it up, enter the species, enter the, date, time, location, all of that, and then you hit submit and your work is done. Or if you like to have a paper form, you can go and collect on paper and then go on the Nature Counts website and submit. It's usually easier on a laptop if you're going that route. I'm going to skip over all of the detailed steps of that, but you can go submit observations, sign up to Nature Counts, get the app or the data sheet, look and listen for birds and listen for amphibians. And then most importantly, I'll focus on this one. Whenever you're collecting data like this, you're always wanting to know the whens and the wheres. So the start time, the end time, the date, and the location as precisely as you can. The great thing about smartphone apps these days is that, if you've got a data plan, and most people do at this point, you can just go, yep, I am right here on this map, and that is my location point. You don't have to worry about finding it later. And then the other thing is if you are submitting a complete or incomplete checklist, and that's just the terms that eBird uses and Nature Counts use it, but you can think of complete as, yes, you're confident in the species you're reporting all of the birds that you were able to identify. And that's again considering like, zoom, a sparrow went by, or gosh, that tern flew by and I couldn't tell. That's normal. Nobody's gonna report every single bird that flies by, but if you have done a complete job and you've identified all the birds that you've seen, great, you can hit complete. And if it's incomplete, you're like, maybe I'm not so sure about this, or I was only really looking at the ducks and that's what I'm focusing on. You can just submit an incomplete checklist. And that just lets us know on the back end for data, like how complete the information is. The zeros on those data sheets, are those really zeros, or were you just focusing on other things? And both are okay. It's just important to make note of it. So feel free to do that and get some practice in. This is like low stakes data collection. It all goes into the Nature Counts database, but it's not necessarily used for any analysis or anything. So we wanted to make it so that people could gain a bit of confidence in just the act of submitting citizen science data, like kind of low stakes practice, because I know that can be a barrier for some people. And if you're already, into eBird and do all that sort of thing, then, carry on. But you can also submit a Nature Counts checklist and then share it to your eBird account by linking it, which is what I wind up doing whenever we do anything for, MarshWatch and all of these programs. So you can do that as well. And then submit the observations either through the app or through the website. And the app just sort of looks like this, and it takes you through different, the date, the time, protocols, how long were you out there for, if you had any comments, were there lots of people with you? And you can always add details and specific locations. Let's say you find, a nesting colony of eared grebes and you want to report that, then you can specifically note down the location of that colony. And you can say, yep, there was like about 20 pairs of grebes here, and you can always do that. And so for the birds, we're doing the counts. So you're doing your best to say, yep, there were 10 mallards, there was 5 gadwall, there was 2 Canada goose. So you're making your best estimate at, what those are. And sometimes it is an estimate. Sometimes it's like, and there were a few hundred ducks far away that couldn't be identified, or, you did your best at figuring out that there was 52 eared grebes, but plus or minus, there could have been more or less. For the amphibians, it is a call code, so I'll go over that in a second here, but otherwise, it's fairly straightforward going through the smartphone app. Amphibians are really tough to try to count, in part because when they get going, there can be a lot of them. And so when doing amphibian surveys, we use call code indexes. So call code 1 means that there is space between the start and stops of space between the start of the calls. So calls of individuals of the same species do not all start at the same time. And usually you can also feel confident. You're like, oh yeah, like there's one there, there's 2 over there, and there's a third or fourth one over this way. You could theoretically count them. It wouldn't be overwhelming. So this is what a call code 1 sounds like for boreal chorus frog. And this is what that looks like visually represented on the spectrogram. You can see there's a little bit of overlap, but they're not all starting at the same time. Call code 2, there's some simultaneous calling. You assign this code when there are a few males of the same species calling simultaneously, but there still tends to be breaks in the chorus, and individuals can be like reasonably estimated. You're no longer saying like, I'm pretty sure there's 4 of them. You're like, yeah, it kind of sounds like 10, a dozen. You feel somewhat able to like reasonably estimate them. So a little bit of overlapping, but not crazy. So little breaks in the calling, overlapping. You're like, okay, I'm feeling like I could possibly estimate this. Code 3 is when it is full chorus, calls are constant, they're continuous and overlapping, and individuals can't be distinguished. It kind of just feels like a wall of sound. Here's what that sounds like. Why is it so quiet? Apologies, I'll have to make sure I make that one louder for next year, but that is call code 3. Sorry you couldn't hear it terribly well, but you can see the visual representation of it, and it is fully overlapping. There aren't any breaks, and if you're out there, it's just kind of like, oh my God, that's a lot of frogs. So that's what those call codes are. And here's a sneak peek at that data sheet. On the backside, there's some of those mnemonics and descriptions for the calls and key field marks for a few species, as well as a few species that it's very handy to have a silhouette kind of in your head for, as well as the amphibian call codes. Okay, we're going to skip this one for now because I need to get back to the conference and pick up folks after dinner. So we'll skip that part for now. We'll be doing soundscapes 2 weeks from now on the wrap up. So that's all for the recorded portion of this evening. You can reach me at llatchway@birdscanada.org. You can find the Prairie MarshWatch page at the URL there, or you can just Google MarshWatch Prairie Canada. Birds Canada is active on various forms of social media. I don't handle that mercifully, so the regular team at Birds Canada handles that part. I just want to give a special shout out to the financial supporters of the MarshWatch program in the prairies. That's Manitoba Habitat Conservancy, the Government of Canada, the Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment's Fish and Wildlife Development Fund, Sask Power, and Wildlife Habitat Canada, and people like you. We are a charitable, not-for-profit, and, donations go a long way in terms of being able to deliver the programming, but also, just covering all of the, the back end stuff that make sure that payroll happens and all of that stuff. So, if you're giving to Birds Canada, it helps, the whole overall mission to keep going and, do the work that we are so fortunate to be able to do. So thank you all to you. And I will see for those listening just on the recording, I will see you next week with the super long review session. Okay.